Good evening. Thank you for being with us. I'm Leah Hogg with our Current Affairs Update in English, which we do on a weekly basis. Today we're having a look at blockchain technology and the use of cryptocurrencies and the impact that COVID-19 has had on their use. Joining us from the US is Professor David Utzke, who we're going to see very, very soon. And he also works in the US Treasury Cybercrime Department. Good evening. Good evening, Professor. How are you?
Good evening. I'm doing well.
Thank you for joining us. I wanted to speak about the increase in fraud and the use of blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies since the outbreak of the coronavirus. Could you perhaps enlighten us about it?
Sure. From an academic standpoint, looking at blockchain, which is part of distributed ledger technology, is certainly on both sides of the fence with regards to COVID-19. When you take a look at some of the scams going on, those are certainly a problem for many people around the globe. And we can certainly talk to some of the specific type of scams that are taking place. But at the same time, developers have found ways to use distributed ledger technology to help combat that fraud. So it's kind of two sides of the same coin.
Sure. What about the fraud? What sort of increase have we seen?
Well, the increase hasn't exactly been quantified because we're far from being through the period, but we have had a significant increase in the number of frauds specifically related to COVID-type activities. There's been an increase in blackmail attempts through email, phishing scams, work from home scams, paying for non-existent treatment or equipment, things of that nature, and then just investment scams related to COVID-19 cryptocurrencies that are, supposed to be towards an aid type activity.
Can you expand on this? What's the most common crime that we're seeing?
I think some of the biggest ones that that have been identified, at least to date, are more of the blackmail. In other words, do this or, and pay in Bitcoin or suffer the consequences. And just the phishing attempts through emails, things of that nature. So basically, people have become more vulnerable because you have more people working online than ever before.
Is it easy to detect? I mean, as a forensic investigator into cybercrime, how do you go around detecting it, and is it easy to detect?
Well, detection techniques can vary depending on how it's facilitated, and I guess to certainly protect investigative methodologies and things like that, we can go into detail about that. But in terms of those that perpetrate the crime, it's very easy for them to do because people are very vulnerable because of the fact that you have many people that aren't accustomed to working online to the extent that they are now. And so they're accepting emails from individuals that, they look legitimate until you just, if you spend a little time looking at your emails, verifying the email address and the content body of the email, you'll pick up on things that don't make sense. I.e., email address may say it's from the CEO of the company. My wife has gotten one of those. But when she, I kind of trained her to take a look at it, and it's like, well, the email address didn't match up to the name. And then just the spelling error and things of that nature, the verbiage that wouldn't typically be used. So there are easy ways to detect it. The big thing is education for employees of companies, and the employees just taking a little time rather than quickly jumping, clicking on things that may be dangerous to them and the company.
Do you think that cryptocurrencies and the use of them makes money laundering and tax evasion easier?
You know, and that's a great question from the standpoint that all the research has been done, both by Chainalysis, a major tracking and cryptocurrency firm, as well as work that's been done at MIT shows that, you know, looking at Bitcoin, which is the certainly by market cap the largest, the decentralized cryptocurrencies, only about 1% of the transactions actually involve various activity. So, you know, the other 99% are completely legitimate transactions based on all the research that's been done so far. So, you know, what you have is a lot of money laundering that goes on through government-issued currencies. They've just found it's not that we've had a new crop of criminals per se. They've just found a new technique or an additional technique to go through the process of money laundering, payment for illicit goods and services, just a number of different things, money laundering.
I mean, 1% to me seems pretty low. However, does this equate into large amounts of money?
Well, absolutely. I mean, 1%, you know, cash is still king, but 1% of cryptocurrency transactions, when you take a look at the size of the Bitcoin market cap right now, you know, we're looking at a market cap of roughly 340 billion. And so, you know, 1% of that amounts to a good size.
Absolutely. How can the safety of blockchain technology be maintained and be protected?
So again, a great question, because when you take a look at distributed ledger technology, whether it be block technology like blockchain or blockless like DAG and Tempo and things of that nature, really the security of the distributed ledger isn't compromised. When you see these crimes being perpetrated, what you're actually seeing are the attacks on intermediaries, third parties. Primarily, over the last number of years, it's been on centralized cryptocurrency exchanges. And so those have been the attack points for them to steal cryptocurrency, is by going through these third-party intermediaries. And if they have poor security protocols, it makes the private keys very vulnerable. And as the saying goes, not your keys, not your crypto. They can obtain the private key to the cryptocurrencies that lie on a distributed ledger, then they can then control cryptocurrencies on that ledger.
What's the impact of this fraud on retailers? Who's actually carrying the liability?
Yeah, so, you know, many retailers don't actually involve themselves in the cryptocurrency exchange for goods and services directly. They go through vendors like BitPay and others to facilitate those transactions on their behalf. And many of those companies carry some type of insurance or other ways of making merchants whole if they were ever attacked.
What about stats and the generation of where this fraud is occurring? What is the comparison, let's say, between fraud that's generated in the US compared to that generated in the EU?
You know, I don't have those stats in front of me, but if you look at just on a global basis, the demographics are pretty consistent across at least developed countries like the US, EU, and the like. The average user age is between, you know, the 25 to 35 age range. And then, of course, in the developer community, it's pretty interesting that many of the developers The ones coming out with the new technology are actually older, usually between 45 to 55 is the demographic age range for those that have actually seen a lot of the new concepts and ideas within DeFi, decentralized finance, and other areas. So the user base is quite young, and of course that makes them more vulnerable from just the standpoint that many of them don't have the life experience to understand the fraud. Our older population, which is more vulnerable to other types of scams, usually involves government-issued currency, and again, they're more vulnerable because of their age, sometimes, mental, emotional deterioration, or just their overall trust for people. They grew up in an age when you could trust a person's words, so they tend to be a little more trusting.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, it's very interesting and very complex. Just very briefly to close for today, Professor. I mean, your job description, it's a blockchain forensic investigator. Can you very briefly explain what you do?
Sure. So I'm working now with the university leading the distributed ledger and digital asset program to introduce crypto forensic coursework into it. But in essence, what it is really having a very broad and detailed insight into distributed ledger technology and the cryptocurrency technology. They're two separate technologies. And having that basis of knowledge allows you to then analyze blockchain or other types of distributed ledgers for criminal activity and being able to trace transactions, as well as working on projects to de-anonymize some of the anonymous things that are going on out there. And so there's a lot of research and work going on at the academic level to work with developers and things like that to assist, much like governments that are working with some of the cell phone makers and things like that to help with the decryption process. So this collaboration between the public and private sector is continuing in this area as well.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you for joining us, and good evening to you. Thank you. That was Professor David Utzke speaking about fraud on blockchain technology and cybercrime and the impact that the coronavirus has brought to the sector. We're now joined by Professor Alexei Dingley from the University of Malta, and he's going to